Okay, howdy, 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 and welcome to Cast Party, Community Theater Unmasked. This is the YouTube show where panelists from small town civic theater groups weigh in on topics that affect how these organizations operate. Our hope is that sharing uh, all of these concerns and issues and solutions will just help everybody. I've gotten some good feedback so far, so uh, we'll move on to our next for today's show. So before I introduce today's illustrious panel and the subject matter for our conversation, let me remind you that um, this is not live. This is a show that if you have comments to make, you can make them on the YouTube page. And also you should share this link with everybody in your group and make sure that they all subscribe. So we did have an unavoidable issue in December, and that had to be canceled. But the plan is every month we'll have a new topic, a new panel, and always looking for panelists. I'll make that pitch later. So today we're doing a little bit of a switcheroo. In the past episodes, we had panelists from local groups talk about how they handled specific areas like casting, production, et cetera, et cetera. Today I'm honored to have two directors with us who have been involved with community theater in a variety of ways. But today I've asked them to focus on how they work or prefer to work with local groups such as yours. I've asked them to chat more about their experiences with groups outside Madison, since the Madison scene can be very different. We'll handle that in another show. Okay, wow, that's a lot of introduction. Okay, so let's get to today's panel and we'll start. David, why don't you give us an intro?
Hi, I'm David Lawver. I have been doing community theater for, God help me, 75 years. No, 65 years. I'm a director, not a math head.
Yeah.
But I started when I was 12 years old, literally. A group of us formed our own little community theater, and I actually directed the first production of that theater.
Oh my gosh.
So,
Wow.
yeah, we borrowed things from West High School. We were all students at West Junior High, and we started there and then formed our own group that survived for a while. So I've been around a long time, a lot in Madison, but with a couple of area groups. I've been particularly privileged to work with Stoughton Village Players. They were actually the first ones after I quit teaching high school. That's another story. But after I came back and was back in Madison, Stoughton was the first one to invite me out to direct.
I didn't know that.
So
Okay.
yeah, on the recommendation of Carlos Moser, who was the director of the University Opera Workshop, who was also a good friend. And so I've worked a lot with Stoughton. Yeah.
Cool.
And my other main big association has been with Oregon Straw Hat Players.
Okay.
So south and southeast of Madison.
Okay. Great. Thank you, Alan.
Hello, I'm Alan Ebert, and I do not have 65 years.
Have to work a little faster.
I dream of having 65 years, David. That's so impressive. I came to community theater in a very interesting way. I started in Army community theater.
Speak up just a little bit.
You need me to speak up? I'm sorry.
Yep.
Is that better? I can also maybe play up my volume here too. If that
okay, that's fine. Help. We can hear you just a little better.
You can hear me okay?
Yeah.
Army community theater is where I got my start. And I was 18 years old in the Army, never done theater before. And, 30 years later, I'm still doing it. So it's been pretty amazing. I am on the National Board of American Association for Community Theater. So I'm the VP of Education. So community theater is near and dear to my heart. And it's especially the jettison of what we're going through right now, and really what is the definition of community theater, amateur theater. So really excited to be here, to learn from Dan and David here and to share what little wisdom I have, or not wisdom, I think more just experiences, lessons learned as I've gone through life. as a freelance director, actor, and I'm also executive director of Children's Theater of Madison. In Madison.
Also, yeah, just
Yes.
on the
So
side
just a few things going on.
with your spare time. Yeah, that's great. That's great. Well, thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate that. So let's just start off this conversation, and then we'll move on to other topics as we get going. Let's start off this conversation with a couple of questions. So when you looked at shows that you might want to direct or groups you wanted to work with, how did you make that decision? Did you pitch a show? Were you asked to step in to a show and the group contacted you, said, hey, we got a show, would you be interested? And how was that experience different? And then what are your standards, or were your standards of when you're making a decision like this? So, David, let's start with you.
Well, it goes both ways. It depends. When I first started with Stoughton, they had a show picked out and said, "Would you come and direct this for us?"
Mm-hmm.
So that happens. In many other cases, I've had a show to suggest or pressure the group into. The thing that it has to be a show I respect and love, or at least can find some fun in. I won't make a case for Dracula the musical with a question mark being great art, but it was a fun show to do, and so we did it. But more likely, I'm a huge fan of the great classic musicals. I'm a huge Sondheim head. Don't get to do that very often in community theater, but you do.
Mm-hmm.
You do get to do it. In fact, I did. Funny thing happened on the way to the Forum at Stoughton.
Mm-hmm.
So, but it has to be a piece that you at least find some joy in, if not value.
Okay, that's fair. Okay, Alan?
Absolutely, yeah, I agree with that. I mean, you have to find. I'm a big believer in the foundation, right? When you build a house, you want a strong foundation. Same with theatrical work. Where does that foundation come from? It comes from the text. It comes from strong written work. And so I really am drawn to stories that are told very well. And when I'm looking at shows, I've been asked both ways. I actually prefer not pitching a show to a community. And the reason being is I may not know that community all that well. I might have know some things, but if the community would like me to pitch a show, things I need to know are, what are your demographics? What sort of shows do you have in your season currently? So that I'm pitching something that works for that community, because all communities are a little different and unique. And I don't know what's best for that. I'm a guest, right? Like, I'm coming into your house and I want to honor your process, your community with whatever I do. And so that's really important for me. I absolutely can come in and if I have enough information to say, hey, I think this piece will work really well for your community. But if it's just like a cold out of the gate, that's really difficult, because I might suggest something and it might not be the right fit at all for the community. And I can sell it and make it sound amazing, but it just, right. And it comes down to who's there to be able to do the piece, right? You know your actor base, you know your participant base, you know whether or not you have the people that can build the set, do the costumes, depending on what is needed for that show, the lights, etc. So I really am cognizant of that. I always view myself as I am a guest, and number one, coming in, there's no ego, there's no right. It is your home, and I want to do the best job I can in your home and create a great experience. That's what I want to do as a director.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah.
The longer you work with the same group, I think you begin to have more opinions about what might work for them. My last show with Stoughton, I had been pressuring them to do for a long, long time. I felt that it was a really good fit for them, and it did turn out to be exactly that. Did a production of Our Town that was just thrilling to be part of. So, but that was the result of working with them since 1983, off and
I
on.
think when you said it in Mars, though, that was a little bit. I wasn't so sure that was going to work, but I appreciated the push.
Yes,
So
it
all
was
right,
not set in Mars.
okay, all right. I remember differently. Okay, sure. Um, so all right. So what others? You kind of opened this door, so let's pick on it a little bit. So David, what are some of the factors that make for a successful relationship for a local group so that the show is great? And sometimes those aren't the same things. Where we've had some conflicts throughout, but the show is great. But let's just talk about the relationship with the group. What are some factors you look for, David, that make that a successful relationship?
For me, it's a group that takes itself seriously, that wants to do good productions. Not every community theater does that.
Really?
There are groups. There are groups within a few miles of Madison that, in their bylaws, in their mission statement, they say we're here to have fun and not rehearse very hard. That
Oh,
will never, ever, ever interest me, as Dan knows. Dan
yes,
knows that I work actors very hard.
yes.
I also, but and over the years, I've learned a lot about directing and learned a lot about what works with actors. I've gotten much less confrontational, much less
Mhm.
angry, and have discovered that works really, really well by and large. So.
Uh, Back to you, Alan. Other elements, other factors for a successful relationship.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, I appreciate what David said because, even groups that just want to do it, if they know who they are and they're just all about wanting to do it as a mission for fun, right? A hobby. But a lot of us are doing that. And I think that's what I love about the landscape of um, amateur theater in the United States. You have groups that are what David explained, and then you have groups that are almost professionally run that have full-time staff. So
Right.
I've worked with community theaters that have full-time staff and coming in. Um, I, I like to work in community theaters that similar to David, that there is a thoughtful culture, right? I am really interested in a culture of a theater. I do not want to work with a theater where there's a lot of egos and it's about
Hmm.
individual people and not about the process
Hmm.
and not about ensemble. I am a big believer in building the best ensemble and want to work with people who are interested in lifting each other up. And so I rely heavily when I'm a guest director going in, and Dan, I've directed at Stone, to say, hey, this individual, I'm curious about them, because I don't know, but sometimes the community knows, ooh, that person might be a real challenge, right? Like they audition really well, but you get them into the rehearsal room and they're a disruptor, right?
Hmm.
And it takes away from the joy of creating art. And so that's a factor too, as you go through and look at a community, is just, and you can sense it, you can see it just based on how their board is set up and how the people welcome you, and yeah,
It
and I
just
ask
seems
a
like
lot of
that's
questions.
an automatic almost to me, but that's not so automatic, I guess, from what you're saying. You too.
Yeah,
That
no, I mean, I
all
think there are
groups aren't
theaters
set up
out
that
there
way.
that, yeah, I think there are theaters out there that are kind of self-serving for their small group, cliquish in a
Oh,
way.
oh, I see.
And so, um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay, that's fair. Um, so this one I know you might have some differences on, so I'm going to put it out there. How, as a director, how involved do you like to be in the production side, which is developing the set, working with the lighting guys, working with, all of the intricacies of the production side of things. David, I'll start with you.
Well, since I don't just direct, I set design, even sometimes costume design, I certainly lighting design, sound design, and I always want to be a part of the conversation. That doesn't mean I have to dominate it, and it doesn't mean that my ideas always fly. But I want to be involved in the conversation. I don't want to be ever told, "Oh, don't you worry about that. We'll just make that happen for you."
Mm.
So I really like to be involved in the whole thing.
Alan?
Yeah, I think it depended on the theater. So I've worked, for example, where I'm currently a show I'm working on. They have a set person, costume person, lighting person, right? And they're artists, and so there's nothing worse than having an artist work on a show and being told what to do, and not feel like they can be part of creating the art. Right. I feel my job in that situation as a director is to come in, cast a vision, let that artist go, come back and present something that I can respond to. Now, I have been in theatrical situations where they didn't have that, right? So knowing that, it's just
Right.
like, oh, okay, I need to bring my experience, or like, okay, this is what I would like for set and furniture, and really understand their capabilities. And
Yeah.
again, that's really important too, because you can have a set person, but if that set person hasn't done a lot of work, but they're interested, it's knowing what level, because I'm an educator at heart. So I love the opportunity to have people grow. When I did Peter and the Starcatcher, I mean, Margaret was really great, right? Set designer, had a really strong vision, and you had a strong team of builders. I didn't have to do much. I just had to respond to what Margaret was saying. Hey, I want to add this, or hey, Margaret, can we have a ladder over here? Because I need it for blocking, right? So it's that collaborative environment and spirit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I think as soon as if I start dictating too much on every level, people then stop sharing. And I'm very cognizant of that, right? It's just how am I leading in the room so I don't shut people down from creative ideas coming from everywhere? Good ideas come from everywhere.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's fair. Is there the flip side of that question? Is there anything that you guys have experienced that was close to being a deal breaker for you, that you went into this project or this show and you started working with a group and it was just either maybe it was this topic where you had a set design and they had a different set design or whatever? Is there anything where, without naming names, of course, is there anything that you got involved with and you went, I just need to get through this because I'm not enjoying it? And do you remember what those topics would be that were kind of red flags, maybe? David?
Really, I've never had it ruin the experience for me.
Okay.
Sometimes you'll need to be insistent, because of some need that the show has, where you just say, no, really, the door to the kitchen has to swing both ways. None of this works without that.
Mm-hmm.
Or we won't believe that that's an exterior door unless it's a 6-panel door. But then the trick I always pull is if it's a situation where I'm getting a modest honorarium, I'll just say, okay, I'll go to the lumberyard and pick up the 6-panel door myself. You can put it in. That's happened.
Yeah. I think once you commit to something, you need to see it through. I think it's really, really important, because it shouldn't be down to one individual that is causing 20 people to have to not realize the show. So what sort of adaptations do you need to make? I'll give an example. I was working on a show where the person who was designing and building the set, so they were doing both, had a lot of issue, all of a sudden, family, health, depression issues, and things were just not getting done. And I could be, as I checked in and had production meetings and was like, okay, where are we with this? And they weren't getting my vision at all, even though I drew it out multiple times and was trying to give them an opportunity, and then realized, okay, this is going sideways quickly. So then I just myself stepped in, right? The stage manager, myself, a couple other people. You show up, you start painting, you start creating, you start adding to
Been
get
there,
to
done
get
that.
to get it close to where
Yep.
where you were. But that was really hard because my vision wasn't realized in that faction, in that
Yep.
part.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that was the part of the production that I could see. An audience coming in may not have noticed. They may have noticed, like, oh, it's and again, it's hard for me to know because I don't know necessarily maybe what the aesthetic standards are for that community.
Sure.
Because if I've never seen other work that they have done, but I have a high standard, and so it didn't meet my aesthetic standard, and
Sure.
and therefore that's tough.
So that's the balance that you guys are trying to achieve. Is you need to have that vision, and you need to be assertive enough to make sure that that's being done in the right way, but you also want to keep all the other people involved because it's community theater, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
what can really, really help, or does really, really help, is if you have other people on the staff that can step in with you and help. I've had a case where a set builder for a big, complicated show just went bonkers on it. And the producer of the show just stepped right in and said, okay, you got to bring the plans out to us. We'll finish building the set. But you go ahead and deal with what you have to deal with. And having that kind of strength. So that's important, I think, in going into any theaters to get enough staff that you know and trust already, that you think can fulfill that role.
Right.
Not
And
so
you
much
guys,
be on your side, but help solve the problem.
yeah.
You don't have to solve that problem yourself.
Do you try to bring people along with you, or would you rather not bring people that are in your lead roles, let's say, whatever they're called, in your production staff? What's your position on that?
It depends on the role. I've got to have a good stage manager. I've had great stage managers provided by the group. I've brought along stage managers where they, particularly if it's a group that isn't used to working with a stage manager. It's
Okay.
like, okay, I'll bring this person. This person will show you what it's like to have a great stage manager. So then you will, in the future,
Right.
get good stage managers.
Okay. So you've done both.
Yeah, I've done both, but you really try to do it in the group because you're helping them grow into it. It's just if they tell you right up front, no, sorry, we have no one that we could nominate for that job, then you say, okay, let me bring my friend along.
Okay. Alan?
Yeah, I've been asked both ways if I wanted to bring in any designers or stage management into a space. I've had theaters ask me that, and a lot of times my response is, "Do you have anyone that wants an opportunity that you feel is capable first before I bring somebody else in?"
Okay. Okay.
And also another thing I was going to add to the conversation are budgets. Budgets are really key for me. It's really understanding, right, Dan, at your theater, if you're typically spending, let's say, $6,000 to mount a show, that's really good for me as a director to know, so that when I am trying to cast a vision, I'm not spending $6,000 on the set alone, and there's nothing left over for costume lights or whatever. So that's right. Understanding the community's capacity on that front is really really important.
That's exactly right. Good thought.
And then what it really comes down to me is communication. And that's, as I've grown as a director, I think I've gotten better and better at communicating and realizing more and more how necessary it is to communicate very clearly what your standards are, find out what their standards are, and sometimes they'll surprise you that no, oh no, we build beautiful sets here. We don't just throw a few sticks up. So there's got to be real two-way communication to make it work. That's so critical.
And I also think we're in such a new age right now. And I would love to hear David and Dan your thoughts on this. But as we come out of COVID, a lot of community theaters didn't have swings or understudies. There was no such thing, right? And in a lot of places, at least I directed at. I mean, even professional theaters are struggling with that today.
Oh yeah.
And so I think that is kind of a new thing as a director for me is, okay, what if someone gets sick, right? Because the show must go on is no longer a thing. And right, if you're doing that, then you're your equity, diversity, and inclusion. You have equity, diversity, inclusion, access issues. So we just know, right? No more 10 out of 12s in our industry, stuff like that. So I just bring that up as another new factor. Mm-hmm. It's like, okay, theater I'm coming into, the last thing you want to do is cancel shows because you didn't have that. So how to have that conversation and casting of, because an understudy might never go on, and yet they're volunteering and they're there every night.
Right.
So
yeah, well, that's good. Thank you for bringing that up.
If you have a long enough run, I'm a fan of an understudy performance, particularly at a Saturday matinee, and let all the understudies actually do the show.
And, we've never done that. That's a good suggestion.
Well, it's hard to get people. I've rarely had it. I think there's only one show I've ever done, Charlie Brown with Oregon, where we actually had understudies for everyone, and on Saturday afternoon, the principals did the chorus parts, and they just switched, and it was terrific.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And you also, it helps the conflict situation because you have a better than even chance of someone being there that night to play the role.
We're not even going down the conflict area. That's not a topic today. We all know about that. So and I have to just share this. We had the person's no longer living in the area, and it was quite a few years ago. A really horrible experience, so bad that 2 weeks before the show, I went to the board. I was in the show. I said, "Do not do this show. Call it off right now." That's how bad an experience we had with this director. And so the difference was they had 2 people interview for the show. We had a show we wanted to do for a particular reason, and 2 people interviewed, and one said, "Well, I've never done this show. I'll be honest, I've never done it, but I'm sure I can do a good job with it." The other person said, "I know the show. I love it. I'd like to do my stuff," and was very excited about it. And that was the last moment I didn't want to kill him. So he was a terrible director, and he didn't understand our group and made all sorts of terrible decisions, and everybody was angry with him. And it was just the matter of interviewing and matching the right director and really understanding their sensibility falls on the group, of course. But I think sometimes it's the shows are pitched as shows, but you really have to get together and find the right connection with how they're going to go forward. And it was really his process that just drove everybody crazy. And so somehow we survived that, but not a pleasant experience. One of the things that what?
Sorry, I was just going to weigh in on that when you talked about process, because that's something that I do, right? Another question that I ask groups that I'm coming in as a guest director is, when do you typically rehearse? Because I've been asked as a director, set your rehearsal schedule. And I'm like, well, what is your community used to?
Yeah.
Right. If your community is used to these hours, and all of a sudden I come in and I'm like, we're going to do these wacky hours, and it doesn't work for the community. That's another thing. So I just throw that.
That's a good thing to ask. And again, it falls to the community group themselves to make sure that that's communicated.
Communication.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the things you brought up, and this is, I don't know, it's not really a side topic, but it is in a little way. We had a discussion at one of the cast parties here about roles and titles of production people. And I would say that we had a really healthy discussion and absolutely no decisions made on any of this. So I find every time I go to a group, another show at whatever, Sun Prairie, Verona, wherever, and I get their program and I go, I've never heard of that title. That's what they call this person. We don't call that person this. They may have the same roles, I don't know. And I find that there's sometimes some disconnect, even though it's we're talking about words here and titles. Sometimes it's emblematic of something that's going below. You mentioned stage manager, and I will mention, I'm going to throw a couple of things at you here. The first, we always start, and this is the toughest role for us. In your mind, and I'm going to go through a few here. What does a stage manager do? That's number one. Assistant director, technical director. What do you call the person who writes down stage directions during rehearsal? What do you call the person who calls the show, whether they're from the booth or from backstage? What about the person who runs rehearsals to make sure everybody's there on time? What about the person who writes down the rehearsal notes when the director says, oh, make sure this gets done. I want to talk to them later. And other key personnel like lighting. Are they directors? Are they whatever, So that topic of roles and responsibility in production can cause some friction because you're expecting a stage manager. This is in your head. And we're going, well, that's not what we do. So somebody want to pick up on that?
Yeah. I think, as David said, that communication as you go in, like, oh, what does a stage manager, I ask that all the time. What does your typical stage manager do at your theater? Because I've seen it be, they do not call the show. They're there. They might take blocking notes, all of that. I use a stage manager is my right-hand person. They are the communication hub between everybody. They are the ones where performers go to know the schedule. They're taking blocking annotations. They are communicating what is the call for the next day. They are communicating with, all of a sudden we decide, oh, we need this prop. So they're filling out the rehearsal report and communicating with the production team on things that have been added or subtracted. So they're the main big hub. Yeah.
Okay, let me just stop there. David, stage manager.
What does it mean? Practically all the things you mentioned until you get into specialized areas like lighting design, set design. That's different people. But all of it, an ideal stage manager to me is the one who actually runs the rehearsal. The director directs it, but the stage manager says, all right, we're going to take a break in 10 minutes. All right, everyone's here. Let's get started. They should really build the rehearsal schedule with the director. The director says, well, I want to accomplish these weeks. Okay, let me put everyone's conflicts together and come up with a schedule. Now, having said that, someone's got to do those things. And if the stage manager is unable or unwilling to do them, then maybe the director has to take over and do it, or say, well, okay, can I have an assistant director? To me, though, I don't want an assistant director. Very rarely. I want a stage manager. I want someone who really runs things.
So what is that? What is the stage manager, as you two have defined it? What does that person do once the show starts?
Yeah, so
they're calling the show.
Well, they're actually, they're running. They're ensuring that the show, because a lot of times I'm on to my next project. Yeah. So I'll be there at opening night. The show is done. If the stage manager is now in charge, if actors are not honoring the work, the stage manager gives the notes. The stage manager says, hey, your pacing was a little slow tonight. Remember what we worked on in the rehearsal space.
Okay.
Right. Yeah, so they're calling the show. They're in charge. It's actually a really amazing position. It takes training to get there.
Yeah.
But, David, you said about assistant director. I really view assistant directors as an educational opportunity, right? Mm-hmm. It's usually someone who is interested in becoming a director, hasn't had a lot of experience. And what I like to do is have that person give me their notes. So I want them to watch the show, give me the notes. And sometimes I'll be like, why don't you share that note, right? So we coordinate that. And I may even, depending on where they are in their journey, and I may have them go off and hey, why don't you work this scene? Go
Sure.
to give them something, because at the end of the day, we're there to help build community. So if you have somebody in your community who's interested in getting involved, I'll find a spot for them.
Sure.
Because you want to grow your base, you want to grow your volunteers, you want to grow who there. So it's never like no, unless there's just nothing there for someone to do. But if the person is interested, how do you get them involved?
The other term I've seen is someone who calls the shows called a technical director. I've seen people that done that. We've done that from time to time here, and separated that role from the stage manager. So this person becomes more the person that's working with lights and sound and props and things like that. And of course, you also have a producer who's working with all of those teams to make sure all that gets done. Anyway, we're not going to solve it, but it is something that really needs. If anything is universal, the definition of those production roles might seem obvious to everybody, but it is certainly not. And it needs to be, on both ends, really needs to be honed in before you go forward.
And you have to come to a common mindset. You can't just say, I've sat with groups who say, okay, we have to have a job description for everyone. Man, if you need it, it's like corporate. If you need a job description to do any job above the level of pushing the set onto the stage, you're in trouble. You have to have people who understand the role. And then the other thing is there are generally accepted definitions for those. A technical director normally is someone who oversees all the technical aspects, makes sure they get done, kind of the head of lighting, sound, props, all of those things.
Right. Okay.
But they're not involved in the artistic running of the show.
Right. Okay. So I'm not going to get off there because that's another whole conversation, but I appreciate your philosophy on that. So this is the one other question here, and that is, would you say that you two individually have a directing philosophy or style? Now, some of us come out in our conversation. In other words, what can someone expect when they're working with you? Like a board's going to work with David, a board's going to work with Alan. What can they expect the way you personally work? Not how everybody should, but how you do it. Alan, go ahead.
Yeah, I think for me, it's you're going to get someone who cares about people, right? I mean, it's the people that tell the stories and make the art happen. And so, as I said earlier, I'm a big collaborator. It is about creating an environment, a brave space where your artists feel free to explore day in and day out, and not have, I try to avoid words like should or don't or not. I ask a lot of questions. If an actor comes to me and says, "Hey, what should I be doing?" I'm like, "What do you think? What feels good to you?" Because a lot of times they're just looking for validation. They already know the answer. They have the best choice there. They just want that reassurance. So from an actor perspective, in the design process, again, really want to let people spread their wings. And it's really interesting because in some communities, they're not used to that. They're used to being told, do it this way and do that. And they're like, wait, come with an idea. If you have to doodle it on a paper, but you're an artist, I want to see what you bring to this, right? Because it is the whole that's creating the piece. And so I'm a big believer. That's my approach. And I kind of live by 5 things, okay? One, it's assume good intent, have good intent, listen for understanding, don't speak for others, and everybody has a right to feel the way they feel. And those 5 principles are really key because sometimes in the rehearsal process, when I was younger in my directing days, someone would challenge something a direction that I gave, and I would assume, oh, that person just doesn't want to do it, right? I would just assume bad intent, as opposed to, what's creating that block for that person? Let's have a conversation. Let me seek curiosity through a lens of curiosity. So I've learned, because you can alienate people and you don't get the best out of people, right? And you have to be a psychologist and a sociologist, and you have to be able to read people and know, okay, I can speak differently to this person than I can speak to that person.
Yeah.
And so really
Okay.
that's, my style is just education, collaboration.
Yeah, that makes sense. David.
And I would just say that I would aspire to all of those things. I'm still a work in progress after all these years, and
That's only 65.
and the groups I work with keep teaching me to go by those precepts. When we did Our Town, there were some designers whose talents I wasn't aware of when I came in, and I thought previous experiences had taught me this is the way I've got to go. And I'm a big preparer, so I would prepare up front. Well, I had to learn that. Oh no, they've got really good ideas, and but at 70 years old, you got to learn to do that. And I won't claim that I'm a completely formed artist yet.
We're lifelong learners, right, David?
Yeah,
lifelong.
exactly.
I mean, every show, Dan, really, I learn something new. I'm educated, and I have a saying too. Director does not equal dictator. So,
and that's been a hard one to unlearn, especially if one has worked under directors who were very successful dictators.
Right.
And
like I say, the show usually ends
Alan
up okay.
can probably even think of who I'm thinking of in that context, because I did a lot of shows with that person, and I had to unlearn. And I think several directors around are still unlearning that they can't be that director. And he was a brilliant director who did phenomenal work for years and years and years, but she was a dictator.
And I think, as an actor, sometimes I will be working under directors and you get very little direction. We have had, I would say the thing that bothers our group most is when there's almost no direction. It's like, well, you've got a word to say, let's see where you go. I mean, that's okay to a spot, but it also gives you, it's not quite, sometimes you want some direction. You want some feel for where that's going to go. That's a balance, I understand. But I would say sometimes I've been involved with shows and I'm going, there's 6 people on stage, and if the director says, I'm not sure, let's just go with the flow and see if I like what I see, totally understand that. But to sit in the back row and just let us flail around, getting very little direction sometimes can be a big issue as well.
Yeah, I think that, Dan, you're speaking to probably someone who has worked maybe not, I'm not going to assume, in a more professional realm where it's really interesting being in a rehearsal room with professional actors who are doing this for a living, because what they bring each day into the rehearsal room and their preparedness can be very different in the community theater world, right?
Yeah.
Community theater, people have day jobs, all of that. And so that director coming in is assuming, well, these people are going to bring new choices every day to the room and explore and experiment. And I want to make sure I don't get in the way.
Right.
But that's my job as a director, is to understand the level. And that is, I think you have to be really cognizant in a community theater landscape, because you may have someone who's worked professionally in a community theater show and someone who it's their first show ever. And so how do you strike a balance of directing, not squashing the professional actors, like you're micromanaging me, you're not letting me create. And then you have lesser, or actors who have lesser experience who are like, no, please tell me what to do. I want ideas. And so I struggle with that as a director. That's probably one of the hardest things, is because
I think it is as well.
I don't want to squash, and and it takes a little while for me to know, like, okay, that person wants me to give them advice. Yeah.
And that's where I've been so lucky to work with just a few groups over a long term. because I know most of the people coming in, and then I can concentrate in the early stages on, okay, what is that person going to need?
Yeah. Well, so that kind of leads me to our kind of wrap up here. And one thing is the first thing we're going to do, which we do every time, it is time for unsolicited advice. So this is the one thing out of our conversation and your thoughts and people you know. What's the one thing that our viewers who are on boards of community theaters, what's the one thing that they should remember when they're working with an outside director? David, let's start with you. What's the main thing that we should take away from today?
I've said it already. Communication. With your board, with your actors, with your technical people, but there's got to be open conversations. And,
Okay.
and it can't be one way from the director. You got to really involve and communicate, and then listen to each other.
Oh, now you're throwing listening in there.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Alan?
Yeah, I think that's key. Listening is key. Yeah, I mean, I think that I said it earlier too, is it's your home, it's your community, and you're bringing a guest in. And so I think it's really important not to be afraid to share information, and communicate, as David has said, and also not to be afraid to approach the director if you see something that you're concerned about or that you feel might be a concern or that isn't working. Because at the end of the day, a good director, what they want to do is give you the best show that they can give your community.
Okay.
So I think not being afraid to approach a director doesn't have all the answers. Doesn't have all the, I don't,
I'm writing that down. Director does not have all the answers. Okay, that's right. All right. I'll remember that.
And it's important for directors to remember that too. You don't have to come up with all the answers.
Exactly. All right. And finally, I told our panelists that I would give them 1 minute each for their, there it goes, shameless promotion. So you got 1 minute to tell you what's cooking for you or the groups you're closest to. Alan.
Yes, so I'll do two things quickly. So Verona Area Community Theater, I am guest directing right now. They're a brand new, never produced work that is going a part of American Association of Community Theaters' new play festival. Brand new piece, so it's fun to explore that with actors who have never worked on a new piece before. So that has been very interesting. You should come see it. It opens February 8th at Verona Area Community Theater. And then at Children's Theater of Madison, we are doing our first ever co-commission with 3 other theaters, Charlotte's Children's Theater, Dallas Children's Theater, and the Rose in Omaha. We devised a piece called Life Doesn't Frighten Me, based on Maya Angelou's poem. And it's geared toward ages 4 to 8-year-olds. And it's Paige Hernandez, who's a Tony Award-winning devised work playwright, came in from Arena Stage to those communities, interviewed youth in the communities, and it's told using hip hop and projection, and it's 5 actors that travel with the production. So it's going to be amazing.
Wow, that is quite a different dynamic. That's amazing. Both of those sound great. David, I know you got something cooking.
Well, yes. Believe it or not, for about 5 years, I've been working on productions at Abundant Life Christian School out on Buckeye Road. It's a small private high school. It's growing now, but we're doing Newsies in April. So watch alcs.us is their website for the actual performance dates and buying tickets online. Newsies.
You're directing, but you're also doing other parts of it.
I'm actually working on the music, so
you're working on the music
to direct.
Okay.
Really?
So before I get out, I wanted to mention a couple things. Next month's topic for February: how community theaters operate as a nonprofit small business. That includes volunteerism, funding, organizational structure, board structure, all of that. So it's really kind of the business of how do you function, and where are the stress points and all of that. And I need more panelists. So if you or someone in your group would be interested, I'm really looking for people that are from those groups. And to be honest, it's been a little bit of a struggle. So I'm really hoping I can get some more people interested in joining this tension-filled thing that I've created here. I can say that without adding too many personal notes, that I've worked with both David and Alan at some length. David cast me as Sheridan Whiteside, and
made him do the whole monologue.
Speech. Yeah. So I could not have done it. It was one of my first leads ever, and I thank him for all of the work he did for that. And of course, Alan has done some things for us, and I was able to be a producer on the show. And somehow, it's the only 18-month show we've done. We had COVID, and then we finally got it off the ground. So anyway, I thank you both for the work I've been able to do with you. It's been very rewarding, and I know that will continue. So, with that, I will ask David and Alan to take a bow. We close out another episode of Cast Party. So have a good show, everyone. Thank you, guys.